Now, as promised, I'm going to explain where this image came from. This painting that you've had it with your packs is a little place up the road here from me, and I went out um, early last year, and I put my sketch down on this scrapbook, this sketching pad. I had my camera with me on the day, but the batteries went on it. Seems to be the story of my life at the moment. Um, so the sketch is always the more important thing anyway. I mean, I use photos when I'm out and about and I'm gathering my sort of reference material as a backup only usually. It's just nice to have a couple of photos usually. Um, but you know, anybody that's sort of followed me over the last 10 years or so will know that I do tend to deliberately sometimes avoid working from photos for what I consider to be a very, very good reason. Photos will lead us astray because the quality of often most photos, most snaps with a camera in my hand, is that your darks are flattened out and your lights are bleached out. So, so unless you're a particularly good photographer and you know how to sort of operate the resolution and exposure on your camera, I would always just use your photos as reference for shapes and position of things in your scene, but back those photos up with an on-site sketch. And it is a sketch, it's not a drawing, and it's important in itself to sort of make that differentiation. uh, you know, a drawing is a detailed something you'd sit down and spend a couple of hours on. A sketch is an exercise in gathering information. And that's, you know, I'll even write on my sketches. I've got the light, I've got written in here, the light direction has come from top right, sort of over my right hand shoulder. I make notes of slopes in the ground here. I dot out my darkest areas. This, if some of you with a keen eye will have probably already noticed, this is a rusty shack. Um, but the rusty shack was over here. I drew it as it was on the day. I sketched it rather as it was on the day. So I moved that, and by doing that, you'll see in my original painting that's in that that was sent out, um, that these couple up. This shape becomes an L shape rather than rather than it being what it was in real life, was a little bit too disjointed. So you had something over here, something over here, you had something here, something here. You know, it's really quite important to connect things and so you have sort of intersections, things join up. Placing too many isolated shapes in your painting just causes confusion, and you know, for the sake of aesthetics, it's always good to try and sort of meld things together so it's a single story. This shape here, and I don't think it's obvious in my painting, which I quite like. You know, I purposely go out, I set out not to do anything photographic. So if there's an odd abstract shape that perhaps people can't work out what it is, all well and good. As long as the main character, you know, the house with its little bit of light hitting the top there, and this shed that comes in front, as long as people can read that much, um, you've done the job. You know, you've nailed the storyline. So anything incidental like this here, and what it was an old trailer off a vehicle. And this, you know, there's the old sort of deflated tire, the wheel down here. But I liked it because of its abstract shape. It didn't have to be pointed out to the viewer exactly what it was. Um, it just added. So what I tend to do is try to look at my painting even before I start it, or deliberately, very much before I started it, with a plan that I'm going to lose some realism for the sake of making it look a better painting, for the sake of better art, more interesting um, aesthetic. So it's very important to bear that in mind, folks, when you're setting out. Is it to look at your reference material, whether it's a sketch that you've made or whether it's a photo that you're working from, is to sort of plan it out and move things about so that it becomes, you know, it becomes a piece of art instead of a copy um, of what was there, which isn't always particularly aesthetically pleasing. So art for art's sake, as the cliche goes, you know, just make it beautiful, make it more interesting. So there we are. There's my sketch. You know, if you want a little bit more in depth about my mark making, a sketch is just a, a collection of marks. Um, the obvious shapes of this will tell you it's a building, it's the end of a house. But when I get to this shack here, I think you should be able to pick up on this. These directional single pencil lines, in fact, why don't I just draw over this and show you exactly what I mean? When I'm looking for information that I know is important, like edges and directional lines, and marks on my paper that will indicate to me when I get into my studio what that surface was. In this case, these vertical lines here, okay, indicated to me at the time that that's a corrugated steel sheet. That roof is a corrugated texture. So I will do things like that. This sort of this simple hatching, directional hatching here will tell me that that's just a simple form. It's in the background. It's trees and field, whatever. Um, the directional lines you can see down here on the slope give me the movement, a sense of movement. The strong triangular shape here is always going to be an eye catch. So we reserve that for the focal point territory. So yeah, sketching. I sometimes think if I couldn't paint ever again in my life, as long as I could just sketch, I'd be a happy man. Um, I do sometimes think, you know, sketches are more fun than the painting. But then again, sometimes when I'm painting, I think painting's more fun than sketching. But it is something that if you can get yourself into the habit of doing, even if you're only at the moment stood in the back end of your house overlooking your garden, um, it's fun. Sketching these things out is great fun. So it's an exercise in gathering information and reference. So to further that note, I've got a bit lucky with my painting. There's the roof of I think it was an outbuilding of some sort. I don't think it was another house. Um, and I pencil it in up there, knowing that each time I make, each time I do a painting, not everything. This is the nature of this style, loose style, mixed media painting. You've got to accept the fact that sometimes you will lose the intended. Other than the main character, you can't lose, the focal point. That means you've got no painting at the end of it. But the incidental stuff, the information that I had on the day, I will put in here in the start of my painting. But there's no big problem if the process goes off in a direction by where you lose that. It's a hard one to explain, but in essence, you've just got to be prepared sometimes to make forfeits if other parts of the painting are dictating differently. Go with it, embrace it, just accept it. Think, well, I got lucky with this when I penciled in that little roof over there, and I managed to keep it by the end of the painting. And hopefully today we'll do the same. But I think, as I said in my pack, the important bit really is to approach these paintings with a very open mind, that be prepared to add things that weren't in the original painting, be prepared to lose things that were in the original painting. These what I'm doing here behind this building is just giving myself some idea of the structure of the trees behind. Um, Here's our uh, window at the top there. Now, of course, I hope you can see this. I'm penciling these lines in a lot bolder than I would normally so that you can see it. So here's my rusty shack. Seems to have can't remember what that was, but I've drawn it. I've put it in my painting. I think it was a sign. Um, and there's the front wall of this. It does look as though there was a little bit of a door to this shack here. I'm still going to put in my, because I quite like it, I'm going to put in this little old trailer, because that, I love that circle, the wheel. It just makes it abstract. Everything else is sort of geometrical or organic. And here we've got a nice circle, and there was the steel structure that came off the trailer that had coupled up to the, I suppose, the car, the vehicle. Now, even I don't. When I stood there, I couldn't work out exactly what everything was that I was looking at. So, when we get to that stage, when that happens, I just draw what I think I saw, and to me, there seemed to be this idea of a couple of posts here. So I'll draw in a couple of posts, and I'll even add some things to this that maybe weren't in my original painting if I think they're going to work. There was a bit of ground in front of this building, and there was, as I said, a dusting of snow. From the left-hand side, there was a sense of a bit of a sort of triangle, an arrow shape just there. So I think that's probably enough information here. So I sort of check things now as before I set about putting paint, etc. on here. I just check a few things out. Quite happy with the position of the house. If you want to check your drawings, your sketches, this is probably more of a drawing than a sketch, but it's very loose, deliberately very loose. You the pointy end of this the end of this house, this gable end here. If I put my pencil there, you can see that it sits on a vertical line that would be sort of more or less equi. If we put the grid in, the grid would look something like this: a vertical here, a vertical here, giving us 3 equal measurements vertically. And if we put the grid horizontally in, we've got 3 equal measurements horizontally. And that gives us a good basis for knowing where things should live. The focal point should live, on one of these 4 intersections. Mine sits, as you can see here, the house being the focal point, the end of the house being the focal point. And look how it sits perfectly on that upper right section there. Not only that, but its movement, if you like, it's the way the triangle points is directly up on that vertical line over here. So yeah, I use this a lot. It's a tried and tested compositional method that's been around hundreds of years, so I don't see any reason to change it. Okay, so I'm going to first of all pick up a wash, and I'll just pick up, I think we're going to start, as I say, I don't have I never sort of set out with a formula as such. I have certain things that I stick to. As in this situation, I'm going to put a wash down, and my wash is going to be a very, very weak mix. I'll show you on the palette in a moment. A very, very weak mix of phthalo green, this is watercolor, and ultramarine blue. So forgive me for forgetting the names of colors, folks. It's I just cannot bring the names of colors to mind when I'm painting. Um, so, but that is phthalo green, very weak, with a tiny bit of ultramarine blue. And if I skim, it could even be too strong, that, so I've got to be a bit careful. And if I skim this, as you can see, I'm just going up the slope here. Look how big the arm movement is. It's if you could see, my whole body moves here. It's not a small movement like this up and down the slope like this with the point of the brush. It's a single brush stroke every time. My whole body moves with this brush stroke. I'm going to go up into here. So there are some white, that we will be leaving some white areas of paper at this stage. So don't go too mad obliterating everything in your painting with this wash. While we're on the subject of a resist, so for those of you that haven't got your crayon, your clear wax candle or crayon, use a bit of thin white acrylic paint. So I'm going to pick up my crayon, my wax crayon. Incidentally, I use household crayon for this. You can buy them from art stores. This hasn't even got a brand name on it, other than it says made in the UK. Bought from, I think, the SAA. This is an oil clear crayon. I'd be a bit more careful with this, because the oil crayon, the oil wax, um, um, remains inert. Is that the right word? It doesn't dry off. It stays tacky. So you've got to be a little bit careful with that, because it might affect your decision on how you frame your painting. If there's something tacky on the surface, you probably want to make sure it does go behind glass. But candle wax, and this in particular, this is just probably just a petroleum type thing, and this does stay just like household candle. Where will I use this? Right. I'd like to sort of highlight a few things in this little shack, in this roof here. Sometimes what I do is, I know that the sill, the lower sill of a window usually attracts a little bit of light. So I'll put a little bit in there. Sometimes I'll use this actually in the window. If there was a tiny little nick, a tiny little shape in the corner of that window, we know that that window is going to be very dark. So a tiny little bit of wax there will keep a little bit of light hitting the pane of glass. I'm going to just travel down the slope over here a little bit, because what that'll do, of course, when we put further washes over, that'll remain white. So I'll go over the blue wash a couple of times. Be careful; it can damage your paper if it's still really wet. I'll put a little bit over here, across the top of this little trailer. Maybe we'll protect that, so when things get darker, that's still light. Little bit in the wheel there. Oh, I do like to sort of scrape a bit over the posts. Now this is really important. If you're going to do the posts, these little fence posts that pop up here and there out of the ground, don't obliterate them. Don't fill them in from edge to edge with this wax. Just do you could do a zigzag or a cross here, over there, a small circle. Make an abstract um, application, an abstract delivery. So it could be a single line, but don't scrub back and forth filling in the shape. It'll just look hideous. It'll look wrong. You want some marks in the posts, but you don't want them to stand out um, that much. Okay, where else could we use this? I mean, it depends on your scene. there are other paintings and other mixed media paintings that I do where I use a lot more resist than this. Um, but I think this is adequate, and I think I've probably done enough there. What I probably do need to do is if some of this wax doesn't register, because again, you know, we do these things. I apply the wax here. If I get a bit sort of carried away, or I think that really needs a bit more acrylic paint over there, the acrylic paint can actually cover the wax sometimes, so it's lost. So what I'm going to do is, it's just sort of, it's almost mischievous in a way. I'm just going to put an abstract um, few bigger lines here, particularly in the foreground. Don't do this beyond this little shack. You know, come down the slope, yes. But if you want to scrape something in the foreground here like this, as I'm doing here, I tend to think if I'm doing these lines that they're pointing somewhere. So I'll come in from left to right at this angle. I'll come in from right to left at this angle. I'll scrape something towards the house up here. So, um, you know, as every piece of art should be, it should be yours. You don't have to, and I probably try to advise you if you can, take your own risks, do your own marks. By all means, copy mine on this demonstration just to see how close we get, because it won't be. I can promise you that. I can't copy somebody else's painting to the nth degree. It's probably, you know, the odds on stand a better chance of winning the lottery. But this is the nature of the way we paint these mixed media, loose style, semi-abstract paintings. Okay, so what would be next? What can we go for next? I'm just looking at what's on our list and what I've got put aside here to use. Yeah, I'm going to use a little bit of pen. The safest place to start with these ideas is probably in and around your focal point. You do have to be a bit careful with this pen work. If you start putting a lot of it, uh, let's talk very briefly about distance and depth of field here, okay? Um, I'm sure we can all gather from the painting that everything from, I would say, this hut towards us is the immediate foreground, okay? Um, the house sits in what I call mid-depth field. It's not that far away from us, but it's closer to us than, say, this woodland at the back. It's closer to us than this little hut that sits in the woodland up there on the hill. Um, so here's the thing. When you're using a pen mark, this is a permanent marker pen. It's going to stay there. When we're having to deal with soft and hard edges, which we do, which are vitally important to make things work, you really must not put anything this permanent and hard in the distance. All things in the distance will have a soft edge, particularly in these lighting conditions. In other lighting conditions, maybe there's a case for, you know, a certain anomaly there. But in these conditions, you really should be thinking about not putting any pen work beyond the house. The house is the furthest point to see any pen worked, pen marks. Marks that you know are going to stand out to the eye and look bold and harsh, if you like. But that's good for for this territory, for this depth. But it's not good for further into the scene. So the closer I get to my foreground, the more work I do in the foreground, the more pen work you'll see. And um, what I'm doing with my lines is as unique as handwriting. I can't sort of say to you, oh, you need to do this over here on this little edge of the roof. You need to do that down here. You need to do this on your doorway. Only you, you know, you should let the idea flow and be. Um, it's a sort of certain amount of caution to the wind. Having said that, I'm always thinking, well, there's probably a little bit of canvas canopy on this thing over here on the trailer. So put a line in this that might just suggest that. You need to show its edges. Probably need to go around the wheel. Um, Probably need to put a center point for the axle where that wheel will be. I'm almost just returning back to sketching. I'm almost doing what I was doing with pencil now with pen in hand. So let's say nobody really can teach you about this line work, but don't underestimate the power of the line. Line work is every bit as important as a brushstroke with paint. Um, it's if you think, oh, it's just a case of outlining something every time, you're wrong, I'm afraid. It's it's an opportunity to add interest. So just going around my posts again. Um, for instance, just to give you an example here, there's nothing on the wall of this little trailer, is there? It's, as you'd expected, it's probably made of plywood or something like that, or aluminium in real life. Excuse me. But I, that's real life. If if I don't want it to look boring, I'll take a circular mark over here, or just a line that runs through the surface of that object, like this. This is how you interpret things. It's how I interpret things. You need to sort of just say, well, I'd like to see a bit of texture there, visual texture. The great thing about mixed media is that we use both visual texture and physical texture. The physical texture, just to sort of explain the difference. Physical texture is when you apply something like we did with the wax crayon, or we might put a bit of impasto paint on, a bit of molding paste. That's physical texture. That's texture that if you ran your hand over your painting, you'd feel it. But you can create optical, visual texture by your line work, with your line work, which is what I'm doing here. It looks like there's texture there. You make a surface look like it's more than just a flat, boring area. So, okay. And just, I could spend more time on that, but I want you to get the main gist of um, this approach. So I will sort of like stop every now and again and weigh things up, and making sure that I'm happy with it, the process so far. And I say this in every demonstration and in every lesson I ever perform. That is, for the loose style, if you're serious about going down the loose style, your painting should look absolutely abstract. It is the best loose style paintings come from an abstract underpainting. Um, the minute you tighten up and start thinking, oh, my window doesn't look much like a window, it looks a little bit weird, it looks just, that's when it goes wrong. That's when you tighten up, you start going back to your old ways and thinking, realism is paramount. And if you start off on that foot, I promise you will end up on that foot at the end of the painting. So start how you mean to go on. Be bold. Make the lines bold. Even if you don't like some of those lines at the end of the painting, there is always an opportunity at the end of a painting to paint over, because this is mixed media, to paint over some of those things you didn't like, and tweak, push and pull a little bit towards the end of the painting. But as I say, at this stage, it's absolutely vital that we see this as an abstract. It's a collection of abstract shapes. Okay. So what I'm going to do next is, this is a fun bit. I really like this bit. Now it's always choice of brush with me at this stage. I have I know I've put a 1-inch flat brush on my list, but I don't have that many 1-inch. My brushes tend to be a bit bigger than that, because this is a relatively small painting for me. So I'm always thinking, do I want to use this one or this one? So um, yeah, I'm going to use this brush here because I'm going to pre-wet the area at the back. So this is just water I'm picking up, but I am painting that water in as though I've got paint in the brush. So I'm looking at those trees and that sort of bit of wooded area around this building here. So imagine you've got paint in the brush and you're painting this woodland. It's probably woodland and field. Make sure that it is wet. You can sort of view your surface at an angle and you'll see it should be shiny. This is where I'm going to bring in my bit of acrylic ink. Now I've got, and I put this on the list, Antelope Brown. But honestly, folks, you can use any color ink you want for this. Um, if you're using, say, a blue, say if you've got writer's ink, Quink or whatever that stuff used to be called, um, what I would do, if you wanted it to be the same color as mine, if you're using Quink, a blue ink or a black ink, put the black ink down first, and then bring a bit of the yellow that's on the list in, which is quinacridone gold or cadmium yellow, whichever you've chosen to use as your yellow for this painting. So um, but I'm going to use Antelope Brown, and because I'm using Antelope Brown, once it's on there and it's doing its magic, as you'll see in a moment, I might just put a little bit of blue in with it while it's all still swimming around on the surface. So here we go, a bit more water. I'm just jiffing it back up because where I've been speaking, it will have dried out a little bit. So here we go. I shake the bottle. If you're not used to using inks, give them a good shake. Make sure the top is on safely. Um, just get them moving a bit. And I use the dropper. And I'll just drop in some ink there. Now, whatever you do, don't use too much, okay? It's incredibly intense color, this stuff. Now, very quickly, before these shapes get a chance to settle into the paper permanently, you need to help them around with the brush. Don't do a complete flat cover. Don't start thinking I've got to fill it in like this, so on every edge. All you're doing, if you look at it this way, all you're doing is helping it move around a little bit. And where there are heavy deposits where I delivered the paint, that's what you want to sort of break up mostly, I think. So down, I think it's quite important that you make a cleanish edge down here because there's white snow, remember, on the ground. And I think that would be good. You can see here, look where my wax crayon is resisting. See the lines coming down the slope there? That's the wax crayon doing its thing. So I'm just making sure that the intensity of this ink isn't too strong in some places. Now, a moment ago, I mentioned I might put some blue in here, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. As I'm speaking, I'm cleaning my brush in water, and I'm going to pick up a bit of ultramarine blue watercolor. So yes, in case you're wondering, you can use watercolor wet in wet with inks. Here's that bit of a said color in here. And look at that. It's just, you need quite a bit of water, okay, with this. You're not going to get great results if you're mean with the paint or the ink, and you're also mean with the water. You're not going to get great results if you're mean with the paint and generous with the water. You've got to get that balance right. So again, I'm just coming in here. And I'm looking at the background sky, and I've just noticed it's nowhere near as strong as my original painting. Now, for all I can remember, on my original painting, I may have. I'm going to go in front of the building. Sorry, as I speak here, I'm doing things. I may have painted back into that at a later stage in that original painting, so we can do that if we choose. So again, whenever you're adding a color, I'm careful not to just obliterate everything else that's sitting on that surface. It's just you're helping things party together, but you're not saying, it has to be a full mix. So, right, what I said, another thing I said not 10 minutes or so ago was this: distant things have soft edges. And as I speak again, my brush rather, is in the water. And this is a soaking wet brush. I'm going into that background and I'm going to tease at the edge of that, uh, those shapes. Don't go too far into that woodland that you've just painted. Just make the initial bit of contact at the edge there. And maybe this is the opportunity now for me to get that sky in the background a little bit stronger. So I'll just pick up a bit more. Sorry, I'm just putting out a bit more paint here. So as I say, let's pick up a little bit more watercolor paint while we've got the opportunity. This is wet. And we'll make that bit of sky a little bit more atmospheric, about here. So again, whenever you're delivering something new, you're not painting and wiping out the thing that you've painted prior to it. You're simply adding to it. And I've decided that that's where that slightly stronger area of sky is going to live, just there. Right, keep an eye on it, because I am, as I speak here, I'm keeping an eye on this. Um, if it hard edges or makes an edge that you don't like, you might just want to go and help it. Just give it a little helping hand to soften out a little bit of. If you let, this is something I learned to my cost dearly in my earlier days. If you let sometimes paint congregate at the edge of your tape up there, when your back's turned, when you're doing something else in your painting, what's happening is you get a build up, a little reservoir of paint and water at the edge of your tape. And when it decides to randomly, it'll spill suddenly back into your painting and leave you with you think, where the heck did that come from? So be mindful to sort of sometimes dry off the very edge of your tape there. Okay, so where can we go here? I think we can still have a bit more fun in this territory here. Um, I'm going to take the scraper card, which is just a cut up credit card. It is a bit wet for this, I've got to say. Perhaps before I do this, sorry, what I was going to do, I was going to scrape, and I still intend to, but it's a bit wet for that. Other than if you just look at your painting from an angle, you'll see where it's really wet and where it's drying out. Where it's just drying out, you can scrape marks. You can't make a mark into an area that's too wet, i.e. here. I don't know whether the camera's picking this up terribly well, but just at the edge of my white paper, as to be expected, there's a buildup of water and paint. So what I could do, I could use this card edge like a sweeping brush and take that paint off that edge. And I could even, knowing that there's paint now on the edge of this card, I could even use that to make some new lines. So exploit everything you can, while it's still damp, while it's wet. Think, what could I be doing with that in its current state? Its current state is somewhere between damp and wet and dry. And it'll vary as the paper dries out in a rather random fashion. It doesn't dry out in a uniform fashion. Areas will remain damp. And that's because of the buckling of the paper as much as anything else. So I think I could show off that we could get them out. Even if I paint back over the front of this house later, that will make for an underlying interesting mark in the paint texture. I still want to imply that there are a few trees back here. Now I could speed dry this, but that's I could speed dry it to a point where I think, right, just a 5 to 10 second blast of the hairdryer will probably have that surface just where I want it. But I think it's getting there anyway now. So I'm just going to infer a couple of tree trunks. Not too much over here. I really shouldn't play over there with this idea, because this is out of focal point territory over here. It's miles away. Keep things simple and soft over here. Just take off that build up just there. There are other things you can do here, but even though this is behind the focal point territory, you don't want to make the woodland more interesting than the house. So, so I think we're okay with this. Is there anything else I could show you, in terms of mm, paint color manipulation? The only other thing I can think of right this minute is perhaps if you ever wanted to lift some out, and you can only do this with ink while it's still damp, then you could take a thirsty brush like this and say, look, I'll just make a few sort of highlights here, and this is um, I just picked up the first brush that came to hand. You can use any of the brushes that are on the list. You take a dry brush, a very dry brush, and use the other one that is on the list, and you sort of say, why don't I lift a little area there? And it suggests beautifully, as though we know the sun's coming from over our right shoulder, just suggests that these lovely sort of winter woodland here is being blessed with a little bit of sunlight up here. It's very nice. I like that effect a lot. Um, and it doesn't overpower what's going on here, but it does still give it some texture. It's just the right balance. Um, I rightly or wrongly, I keep making reference to my own painting. Now that can be of benefit. It can also be a bit of a trap if you're not careful. You start looking at your previous painting and think, I really like that painting. I'll try and emulate it the second time. But that really is not the way to go. I shouldn't be encouraging you to do that because um, therein lies the age old problem of you will try to copy something, and just because one bit of it goes wrong, you get an instant downer on the proceedings. You just think, there we go again, I've lost it, so don't. This is another painting, so let it morph naturally. Just come up with your ideas, do your bits, do the things that you know you can do, but don't make comparisons. The worst thing you can do, I think, is make comparisons to somebody else's work. um, your best work is your best work. That's the only view you should really take. It's and you'll do better next time because that's the way it goes. um Going to take what I'm going to do. I am going to just put in a little bit of let's have a bit of Payne's Grey here for a minute. I just fancy seeing a little bit of neutral in some places. This is Payne's Grey watercolor, and I'm using the rigger brush. I've just picked up a little bit of blue with it too. So it's Payne's Grey and a little bit of weak ultramarine blue. And, if we want to show the house off more, I mean, we've still got work to do on the house, obviously. We haven't really touched it yet. But I'm doing this now knowing that the impact around this house uh, will be there at the end of the painting. But now's the time to be thinking about that. So, and I do confess, I am using my original painting for this reference, but I'm being also ready to sort of um, let take my foot off the brake if things don't start. Um, if I think something's not working on this painting where it was on the earlier version. So yeah, that's okay. That's okay. Let's go a little bit darker in front of this lovely little sort of shack up here. And this looks as though it might be working. So it looks as though we might be able to keep this little detail in. So yeah, I'm starting to think for the very first time in the process here of some realism, some actual detail, some suggestion of a real place. I always think that following a light line, if you can get a little bit of darkness behind something light, as I'm doing here, it always nails the story and nails the information to the viewer. Oh, look, there's a slope down here. I can see it because, the color contrasts are in place to bring it to the attention of the eye. Okay, can I resist a little bit of spattering? No, I can't. I never can. I don't think that does anything for the painting, but it makes me feel better. Keeps me in the loose frame of mind. Okay. How's the time going here? We're 11:30, folks. Um, if I think we should stop here and take a break because it's appropriate, I will. But just weighing up the next step, the next move here. Um, yeah, I think it would be, before we take a break, I think it would be nice to get some warmth now in here, in a bit of the foreground in the shack. Now, it would be nice because we've used yellow in the background. We really want warmth in the foreground. Now, the yellow is quite a warm color. So the only way this is going to move forward is by making it even warmer than the warm that's in the woodland. Okay, does that make sense? Um, as I'm sure we all know, warm things bring things forward, cool things push things back. That's the rule of thumb. There are exceptions and anomalies depending on lighting conditions, but that's a reliable one, and that's what I'm thinking of right now. I'm thinking about how I make a nice, warm, rusty-looking shack, and by making it warm, I know it's going to make this object appear closer to us than the warm that's in the trees. And for that, I'm going to use a bit of, this is SAA burnt sienna. Um, it's only, this is going to be a really, this is back to a sort of mini wash. So there's no need to worry about where this paint lands exactly, as long as it's mostly in the roof of the shack. I'm speaking with one eye on other things. I've got a little build up there of paint and here. Now, I think they may flourish into a cauliflower. If they do, great, because I think it's a very good place for a cauliflower to occur. It'll just look like some of those low-lying gorse bushes, that sort of thing there. So I think I can ignore that. I'm not going to take it off. I'm not going to take it off with a sponge or a tissue or a brush. I think we'll let them develop. Right, back to the job in hand. So I mentioned a scruffy, cheap hog brush in the list. Um, and that's exactly what this is. It doesn't get scruffier, it doesn't get cheaper, and it doesn't get hoggier. um, now, I bought these in Lidl's about 5 years ago. I think they were all of £2 for about 20. Um, so there's the wax resist. Let's leave a little gap somewhere in this roof and put the lovely color back over here. And there's the resist again. I think we should drag a bit of this down here. Now you'll see me go a little bit wilder in a moment. I just wanted to deliver to an area in the painting I know that is important. Sometimes with my finger I can deliberately spoil that edge a little bit. And here. So what I'm going to do now, same brush, but I'm going to just pick up a lot of water. So there's not much paint left in this brush now. It's mainly all water. And I'm going to, with the side of the brush like this. So the brush, if you want, if you can do the same as me, just drop the brush flat on the surface of your painting, pick it up by the metal ferrule and scrub it back and forth sideways. I think I'll stay out of this territory because I quite like that cool. What we're doing already is another thing here where we're playing off warm against cool. So the cool of the snow in this area here against the warmth of whatever this is in the foreground. Okay, so I'm just going to break that up a little bit more as it reaches the ground. I don't want a hard edge at the too much anyway. At the if I do, I'd change it with a bit of Payne's grey. I just want to make sure that things and just as I was saying with the line work about don't put line work in the distance, don't sorry, don't go now putting, because you think, oh, this is a lovely color. Don't start thinking, oh, wouldn't it look great up there, over here in the woodlands up there? No, don't, because you've then lost your sense of depth. You've killed off that difference between a warm color in the foreground and the cool color in the background. You confuse the eye. You're saying, well, I thought this was meant to be the sort of close area because it's warm. So don't go warming up that area back there just because you think, well, it looked good there. Right, I think I'm going to take one last check on this, and I think we can at least have a talking break, if not a break for a cuppa. Um, yeah. Okay. All right. Perhaps what I should do, just as I did at the back there, I'll take a little bit of Payne's grey with a bit this time with a little bit of the burnt sienna in it. Just put a little bit more Payne's grey out, and I'll explain what I'm doing. This time, sorry, I'm picking up a bit of this Payne's grey, but this time with a bit of burnt sienna. And that'll give me a darker version of what I've just been using, basically, which of course was just the burnt sienna. And I want to be careful with this, just to sort of suggest where this little shack perhaps meets the ground. I'll use my finger again, perhaps scrape those two colors together. Um, of course, when we get back to this, when I'm happy with the washes that we've put in, etc., we'll start putting more detail in, perhaps a bit more pen work in, some line work with the rigger brush. So I'm still thinking this is what I want you to think too, about of rather it yes, do a little bit of um, finesse. You're showing the sort of difference between the roof here and the background, etc. Yes, but we should still be thinking this is this is big shape. This is the big shape part of the painting only. Balance. So let's take this darker area into this section down here. By going a little bit darker around here in front of us, we bring a bit of body to this area. A bit of it substantiates it. It sort of it makes it tangible. It's real. It's in front of us. I know that I can go around these posts with something dark, and I won't lose them because of course, we put wax resist on them. And I think that's probably a good place to leave it for now. There's something there, perhaps just to break that up a little bit. I want, as I said, mostly this. Oh, I think this is a little bit perfect. This bottom of the house over here. So if I pick up that quinacridone gold again, or anything for this matter, as long as it's not the burnt sienna, um, I'll just encourage this little ground shrub to poke its way in front of the house there. Otherwise, it looks very contrived when your shapes are clean and uninterrupted. You should interrupt your shapes, and that's the only person of me doing what I just did. If you don't interrupt these shapes, it's as though everything is flat in its own plane, in its own vertical plane, and nothing is in front of it. Well, there are things in front of it. The shed's in front of it here, and that little shrub to the right hand side is now in front of it. It just adds, it just makes the whole thing look more convincing, even if not in a particularly realistic style. It gives it depth. It gives the suggestion of real depth. The loose style is an odd style. It's a difficult one because you have to sort of find the balance between realism and um, and expressing yourself and in an artistic way. You can't, if you didn't emulate real things, i.e. a bush, a bush, a window, a shack, if you didn't include those things and point them out, it would simply be an abstract painting. So we're in that lovely and exciting territory where things are is it this? Is it that? It looks great because I love the shapes and colors in this painting. That's what it sort of comes down to. One very last job while I think of it, and this is a bit of a habit of mine. I will just put in the window because I know that when we come to putting a wash over that later, I want that paint to have gone right into the paper, not sat there still damp, just for me to put a wash over it and it disappears. So put our window in now. Um, Ultramarine blue, sticky paint, really sticky paint here. Ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. A single lozenge. I'm always using that word, lozenge. But it's the best way to describe most of these shapes. It's a sort of, sorry, I've just run out of burnt sienna there. That's what a lot of these shapes are. They're incidental marks, but they are required to represent things from time to time. And in this case, a window. It's just a little movement of the brush. Quite like the idea that it's not a clean edge down at the bottom. It's not a, don't tidy it up with a hard edge. Have a hard edge at the top by all means, because there's no light getting up there from this angle, but there will be light hitting the bottom of the window. So break that little shape up. It looks like nothing, doesn't it? It looks like a throwaway mark the artist has made putting that window in. But it's just, think, can I do this in a single brush stroke? It just took me 2 hits, or was it 3 hits? I don't remember. Wished I'd done it in 1. That's always my intention. But please, 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 it should never be more than 3 at any time. I'm just going to give this a little bit of extra depth, just there, while it's still wet. And yeah, I think, do we want to put a little bit of just in here while it's on the brush? And yeah, it's still very damp there. I think we might be better off doing this when things have dried off a bit. So folks, I am going to pause the recording and going to come back to you, see how you're all getting on. There. Yeah, so just to recap there, that last 5 minutes or so was some thought towards what I needed to do now before we took a break. On my original painting, I think there's quite a dark area here, but I was more concerned about making that work over there. This one is less important, more incidental. This dark mark here, that can be done at any time if I do it at all. Probably will. So, time to take a break. Right, I think what I'm going to do next is I'm going to pick up the rigger brush, and there's some really good questions in that break actually, and I like questions because I hope they help me make it a better experience for you all. Things that I can answer that maybe I don't think of answering when I'm in the midst of everything else. And that one of the things that was brought up was what sort of sequence must you do these things in? Well, there isn't really a set sequence. There's probably, what I would tend to do is I will always do the big shapes first, and I think you'll find that most artists, even some that don't even paint in the loose style, will always block in their big shapes first. I know it's a tradition for oil painters. So but when we get in further into the procedure, you get to a point where you think, well, I could do this next, or I could do that next. That's when it becomes a little bit personal. You think, well, I'd rather do this. This is what I feel more comfortable with doing next. And that's where I am as I speak. I'm thinking, well, I could, perhaps play around a bit more over here in the foreground, but it makes me feel happier and more confident if I re-establish now some detail, because we're going for the finish, and that's, that's simply speaking, that's what I need to do. So I need to know that people are going to see my main focal point. So this rigger brush has got a bit of burnt sienna in it and some Payne's grey. Now you could use burnt sienna and ultramarine blue as an alternative. It makes no difference. as long as one is very dark, at least one is warm and one is cool. So often what I'll do is my lines will be made up of the mix being dominated by the burnt sienna and then dominated by the blue or the Payne's grey. It's nice way. Even lines should vary in terms of color and texture. But this is the dry brush mix. Now, I'm getting a feeling, folks, there might be a couple of us in our company today that are not familiar with my technique, this particular technique. It's not my technique. It's a technique that I use a lot. And it's a technique that I think gets overlooked a lot and doesn't get shown enough. It's called the dry brush technique. I have a rigger brush in my hand here. Let me just hold it still, otherwise the camera's going to go mad. There's the rigger brush. As we all know, the rigger brush is the one with the long fibers, okay? The dry brush technique, as the name suggests, has very, very little water in it, okay? What it provides is incredibly intense dark lines like this. Often I've described this technique and people have gone away and said, yeah, I've got that. And when I've gone over to their painting, when we used to be able to walk around the classroom, I've said, what happened to your lines? They've disappeared. Well, I did what you said. I picked up lots of paint. What they did was they picked up too much water. So what first appears to them as it's fresh is a very dark line. 10 minutes later, that very dark line at best has gone to something much paler. So this is it. This is the secret, if you like. It's picking up the tube paint, and this is why I insist on tube paints. You'll never in a million years be able to do this with pan paints, those dry little cakes, okay? Or if you did, you'd be there for a year trying to apply the paint. Take a bit of the blue. I'll tell you what water was in here. It was dunked in my water tub. Then I squeezed it as hard as I could, leaving almost a dry brush. And the water you can see in there, if you can see the reflection now, is what I've added afterwards. But once it's dry, so it's not a dry brush out of your, straight out of your little wallet. That wouldn't work. It has to be dunked in water and then squeezed. So there's a millimicron of water dampness in that brush. And then I pick up the blue, I roll it around as I'm doing here. I go to my burnt sienna and I roll the brush around. I don't know if you can see my fingers twisting here, but the brush is being rolled like that, like a crocodile roll. So that means that both colors coverage, it's evenly covered all the way around the fibers. Then you might find when you first use it, it doesn't want to come off the brush. I've got it down to fine art now, excuse the pun, where I know how much to load up. But you might, when you first start doing this, think, well, it's not coming off the brush. That's the time to take the tiniest, and I mean the tiniest amount of water. I don't know if you can see this. There's a tiny little, almost tear volume of water there. Take something like that, okay? And that'll get the paint moving off the brush to start off with. And what I do with this mix is I draw. I simply go around re-establishing my drawing. Look how that shape, that little shack now pops out. Soon as you define it by a lined edge like this, it pops out. Now the danger is, if you think you can just go from A to B, let's call that A and that B. That's the top of my little shack there, okay, a horizontal line. If you think you can go from there to there with a solid unbroken line, you're mistaken. That would be very wrong. Solid lines don't work. They're horrible things. So you need to sort of just touch down here for 3/4 of an inch, whatever, put a little lozenge shape here. Stops being a line sometimes. It becomes a little miniature lozenge shape. And then you might decide to come down the edge about here. But breaking... what I'm saying is break up the delivery in the line, okay? So that said, I'm just going to plod on here now and work through. So I do this, you can see where I do this. I do it in many places in my painting. I have a slope down here. This is why I make notes on my sketches. This is a slope. So when I come to painting it, I need to make marks that suggest a slope, and lines, dry brush lines like this are fantastic for that type of message. Not too much, don't go too mad with this stuff.
But it delivers a wonderful type of paint. It suggests there's something dark there, but it's also sort of glistening. It's crispy. It's a crisp edge. So I'll strengthen some of those up in places. Let's have something just comes down to our. Now there's too much. I've picked up too much water, so let me just pick up more paint, which will compensate for that extra water. Don't be tempted to the hand. If you go back to when we were all school kids and you're taught to pick up water every time you picked up paint, that's fine for a lot of techniques. It's fine for a lot of this other stuff. But when you get to this, you've got to tell that hand that's got a brain of its own to stop going over there for the water. It will do it. It will. And if you had to do what I had to do years ago, I had to put a book. I joke not. I had to put a book on my water tub to stop me from automatically and thinkingly pick up more water. And that little book, after the first couple of weeks, was stabbed and dotted with where I was trying to pick up water. Okay, so maybe we'll go around the post a little bit here. Anything across the ground level. Lines are great because they are an opportunity to point us, the viewer, towards our play area, the area of interest. I think I'll just go around that window, give it like a slightly outer frame to it, just there like that. I can now. This is where I went back to in the earlier stages. I shouldn't really use this technique. It's a bit like the pen. You shouldn't really go beyond mid-ground with this type of thing. So, but as with everything, there's a caveat, there's a contradiction in everything we do. What I'm going to make sure I do when I get up here to this little shack, I'll put a little wash over that. Again, it's one of the very last things we do. But look again, just how that window pops out. Just because I've sat next to it, I've set it off by putting a little dark mark near the white surround of the window. I'll work a bit more rapidly now, folks. Down here, I've got light marks from the wax. I'm now putting in a dark mark equivalent near there down the slope. I'll put in some of this here. Now, I've got pencil lines everywhere in here. Some of them I will leave in because that's the nature of this. Others I don't like. When the painting's dry, I will erase. Or just the beauty of another beauty of watercolor. As long as you let the painting dry completely, your pencil will come off. You can leave it there for as long as you need it. When the painting's dry, you just rub it off as you would normally with a soft putty eraser. Don't use those horrible hard plastic school erasers. They're hideous things. Right, could we put in perhaps a couple of little suggestions of some posts over here? On my original painting, I got a couple of little light spots there that look like it's somebody's coal bunker with a bit of snow on top. I really like that, but I haven't got it this time. So what? No tears, no wasting time sort of crying over spilt milk. We'll make this one even better, but in different ways. So that's back into here. Perhaps we could put some vertical skinny lines. Now you could be sat there thinking, why don't you do that with the pen again? Why don't you just go back in with the pen? And you could, trust me, folks, please, you could. It's your painting, you do what you want. This is what works for me. I tend to do both quite often. I'm quite happy doing what I'm doing now and additionally going in with some extra pen work, same pen as I used earlier. But while this is fun, while I'm having fun with this is what I'm going to stick to until that little bird on your shoulder says, do you know, you're at the point of doing it too much. You're overdoing it. So just try to be ready to hit the brake now and again. Underneath my little, I've decided to make this better than the one that's in my original painting. The one in the little ledge to on top of my trailer here is a bit flat and boring. So I've with this one, I've just sort of I've sculpted it a little bit different, like a little bit of an angle on it. Maybe where the tarpaulin is pulled over there. I think we could go around the arch of the wheel on this trailer, just around the arch, and maybe into the center, because we know in there's that sort of center part of the what you call it, wheel. Sorry. everyday words disappear when the brain's having to make that shift to create art. It's not the same. It's not the same function. So I'm just coming in from the foreground here with some line work. Really love this. It's like writing it's like a written sentence. Some lozenge shapes down here. I'm just, you know, just a push here with the brush. Be a bit careful. I'm getting to that stage now where I could overdo things. Now, if I were to compare this with my original painting, as I look up on my little iPad screen that's over here, I probably can say, well, that's a lot darker around here than the original, but that's okay because there's a final stage to this painting and I'm about to do it. The other thing I have overlooked, and this is a genuine oversight, folks, I tell it like it is. I should have gone over the roof of this little shack with my blue, my background color. Okay. For some reason, probably talking at the same time, not concentrating on that. I managed to sort of leave it white paper. So I'm just going to put a little bit of very weak Viridian green on there. Now, I haven't used any acrylic paint yet. So, and again, this is very typical of this. I have to put a lot of things on the list. I did use a little bit on this painting, on the original painting. So I'm going to find a place for us just to have a dabble with this. I think dabble with the acrylic painting. Before I do, a word of warning, and I'm sure you already know this, so forgive me for stating the obvious. Acrylic paints will destroy your brushes if you don't put them back. Sorry, if you don't clean them off as soon as you're done with them. I'm just talking and painting at the same time here, folks. Adding a couple of extra lines to my roof of the shack there. Right. Okay. Yeah. Let's put a little bit of acrylic just because we can. So I'm putting the acrylic. I'll put a little bit of phthalo blue on the edge, and I'll show you this in a moment. I'll show you my palette. A little bit of phthalo blue. You don't need much for this. It's just less than a garden pea size. We'll have a little bit of white. I tend to use acrylic in these situations more for a resist than I do for making a color. But I'm going to show you what I might do if I am using it as a color here. Let's say we want to jazz up this little trailer a little bit. Let's pretend we've made the decision. Well, I like the trailer and I want to make sure that it pops out more than it did in the original painting. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a flat brush, take any brush. I just picked up this one because it was to hand. I'm picking up here, let me just show you. Picking up here a little bit of the phthalo blue. This is acrylic now, okay, acrylic paint. Phthalo blue, tiny bit of the phthalo green. I get that beautiful turquoise. And now it's just a case of how light you want it to be. So in other words, what's the tonal value of this? If you have a look at the thing that it's going to be applied to, it's going to be painted over. It's this this trailer. So I don't want it to be garish. It mustn't compete with the house. It shouldn't do because that's very much a tonal contrast, whereas this is going to be a color contrast. But nevertheless, the color has a tonal value as well. And I'm just going to jazz up a little bit of dry brush technique here. Just going to jazz that up. Now that I've done that with that on there, this is how these paintings go. I'm going to put a little bit of, and I'm using watercolor here, so I'm mixing watercolor with acrylic. If I could just find my quinacridone gold. Here it is. I think I spend more time looking for I have them all to hand when I start painting, but in the throes of the painting, you sort of tend to lose them all. So what I'm doing there is putting a little bit of quinacridone gold with the acrylic. Okay, look at that. It's a fantastic color. So I'm going to just apply a little bit of that to the blue, to the turquoise that I just put on. And we could then, you got to be a little bit careful. I get carried away, so you know, be warned, folks. A little bit more white in this, perhaps make it a slightly more turquoisey green, and we'll put a little bit at the base of the shack here. I'm looking at my original and thinking, well, I didn't use acrylic for that bit, but it's working. There we are. I think that's enough. So, you know, it's worth going to the effort. It was a very small part of the painting, but it was worth the effort. It just adds a little bit of spice over here. You know, dare I hint a little mark over there somewhere? Yeah, that's okay. I've got that sort of thing happening through the color. So the color becomes a little mini story within that bigger story. And if you can, try think that way. Whatever you add, never negate. Whatever you do, whatever you add to your painting, make sure it doesn't negate the main story. It doesn't distract from what you set out your original plan to do. Right, let's finish this painting. Right, there we are. Nice clean palette. I'm going to mix up a lovely wintry shadow color. Back to the big brush, the original brush. And my water that I'm collecting from my water tub here isn't particularly clean, but it's never going to spoil what I'm going to mix. So unless your water is really, really contaminated, and when you're doing what I'm doing here, you can see horrible color, a dirty gray color, then I'd suggest you change the water in that tub. But you know, it doesn't have to be absolutely clean, fresh water every time, but you know, within reason. I'm just putting some water in there. Sometimes I pick it up by hand. Let's get the colors I want. Alizarin crimson. I can get the top off. Alizarin crimson. Some fresh ultramarine blue, though I've got some there. Let's try to pick it up. I know that this bit's a bit contaminated with the earlier mixes, but if I'm careful, I can get that. Now, whenever you're doing this bit, folks, I would say make a big puddle of this, okay? I'm also going to take a little bit of the green that's there because it'll work. It'll keep things on the same hymn sheet sort of thing. Yeah, make a huge amount of this. It could be quite weak. This is the color you've got to be very careful with. Alizarin crimson, whereas you need a pea-size volume of the ultramarine blue, you need a fraction of, by comparison, a fraction of the alizarin crimson, because it's so much more intense a color, and you can really spoil a shadow color if you add too much of the alizarin crimson. Now, I don't know, and I've been mixing these things many years, God knows how many times, several times a week for the last 15 years, and I still get this wrong. So don't panic. Here's the thing: it's okay to get it wrong. It's not okay if you just apply it anyway. You just think, oh, I've done it again, I've made it too strong. Well, stop. Just stop. As soon as you think it's too strong or not strong enough, don't continue regardless. Stop, and if it's too weak, I'll do the obvious. Add more paint. Don't add more water. Add more paint. Only add more water if you think you're going to run out of the mix. If it's too, what did I say, weak? If it's too strong, then of course add more water. It's as simple as that, but don't plod on regardless. Make sure, stop. It's okay to make one bad brush stroke somewhere. I have a tissue, and that's what you're going to see me do now. When I put this shadow on, I always have actually more than this. There we are. I make a little, almost like a sort of golf ball, 3 pieces of kitchen roll rolled around each other, and that's my comfort blanket. That's my safety net. If this shadow mix is horribly too strong, I'm straight on it and I stem the flow. I lift it off as though it's you're stemming a cut. You know, don't I put it that way. Sounds a bit weird. Put it that way because if people tend to do that to take off paint, scrub and rub, think they'll get rid of it. You don't. You just hold it. You got to do it straight away. You got to react. You got to make that decision. Yes, it's too strong. Don't hang about. Go straight on it. Hold it down like that and take it off. Then adjust your mix and go back at it. It's no real biggie. Right, I'm going to start here. I quite like the idea of some shadow here. I think that's possibly a little weak. Let's just grab a little bit of ultramarine blue. Put a little bit more out on my palette there. It's not far off actually, and I certainly don't need to. I don't think I need to take it off. Only that I've got a bit too much water there. So let's put the ultramarine blue into this. See how big this this puddle of paint is. Okay, you're always, you know, you're talking a couple of pence if you waste any. So always better to make way too much, way more than you think you need. Now that's too much red. Look at that. After what I was saying. So let's get the blue back in. At least now, yes, it's too strong as it stands. I can see that. But at least now I can dilute to taste. So for as long as I'm careful, my hand will go in the water like this, and I'll just take some water to that. I think that should be okay. So do I go back to where I've been? It's a shame. I don't like doing this, but I'm going to. I'm going to paint over where I've just been. And that's the thing. This is Loose Star watercolor. Economy of brushwork. I don't like going back over. Once you've committed to something, really, you should stick at that. But this is, you know, I think this is good for you to see, folks. I'm going to go across the front of my little hut there as though there's no breaks. I'm going to dab off a little bit of edge. When shadows fall on organic things like trees, vegetation, I always soften the edge like this in daylight conditions. Now I think I want to break up that flat roof with a bit of that shadow. Look at that, it's really lovely. There's a little bit of that roof now in the light. So where's the edge of the shack? About here. Should try and do something to indicate that that is the case, that there's a change of angle there. There's the edge of the shed, and then the shadow goes back into the woodland, and it's over here. We'll definitely see. I mean, you can even sometimes get away with the echo shape, the shadow of this roof in the woodland there. But as I say, it should be mostly soft of edge. I'm going to go up into here a bit. Don't stop on the top of the roof, whatever you do. That would be too contrived. Let's take the shadow to here. Let's say the shadow then, let's leave an area of sunlight up here, okay, where my finger is, and say that the shadow now comes back in about here. Now here's the one that's going to scare you, I'm sure, but this is I think 2 brush strokes or 1 brush stroke, 2 brush strokes. I want to leave about this area here. There's a build up of paint there. I want to leave this area here as though it's in sunlight, but I do like to take my shadow partially into where the window is. So what I'm going to do is this. Take it up. It's all about this edge that I'm leaving here, not what's happening here for the moment. Let's get this one up. Let's dogleg up towards the window, go through the window a little bit, and then take the angle back that way. It's as though there's another building, which in fact there is. There was a neighbor's building on my right, and it's that that's throwing this shadow. So now the rest of it is dead easy. I just take it to ground. Don't paint over I wouldn't necessarily paint over the ground immediately in front of the building, okay? Leave this snowy pale area here. It's okay to come down the slope with another shadow separate. Look at the angle of the brush. This brush here, it's like a knife edge here. It's making very clean horizontal slithers or sloping slithers. Now, soften the edges on foliage. So wherever you've put your shadow up here, I think I will put a little bit more shadow here actually. Wherever you put your shadow here, on foliage and trees, soften the edges, but not on the building. The building is a hard surface, and Rule of thumb, yes, there are situations where this isn't the case, but rule of thumb is when shadows fall on hard surfaces, as in this, they will be hard edge. Okay, now this is where the foreground goes dark, and this looks scary, but this is the easy bit. I'm just saying, look, all of this here now is in shadow. Most of my little what's this called, a rusty shack is in shadow. I perhaps will suggest that my that's shadow 2, and this is where that darkness comes from. And I've noticed when people copy my paintings, they haven't realized that what I did was I left the darks, a lot of the darks, to the very end. They go straight in with the first brushstroke in the very first stages of their painting and put these darks in as a first, as though that's, so I'm talking and thinking that's going to be darker there because there'll be more shadow from the house. Sorry. So yeah, there's a tendency that people think that's the way I painted it, but I didn't. I leave these big darker areas in the foreground till last, and that's how things marry up. That's how, if we put a dark here, okay, that dark is now connected. The dark, I'm sorry, I should be using the word shadow. If I put a shadow just in this right hand edge, I try to make sure that it travels, it's connected, and it's connected to this. And look how that building is now connected to the shack because of shadow. Look how the shadow that lies across the ground here is connected to the shack. There's very little. Once you put a shadow in, it's almost as though you're weaving a single reinforcing thread through the entire scene, and it's that couples and puts substance and there's another sort of uniformity, if you like, to your scene. It pulls everything together, and it instead of all the individual items looking separated and isolated. I think, folks, I'm standing back here as I'm talking, and I'm trying to weigh this up. I think I want to see, and this is different to my original, I think I want to see a shadow that outlines my little, I forget what this thing's called, a trailer, and maybe only part of the trailer itself. I'll put some of the trailer in shadow, so it's only part of the trailer is showing up, but it's just enough. That bit of the trailer is just illuminated enough to show off what it is, that there is something different there. I think this, so I'm fine tuning. I'm just saying right here, this is where it can get tricky. Lee, if you're not confident to finish it like this, as I am here, I've done it many times, and I still mess up sometimes. I still take it. If you're not, just put down the brush, say, that's a really good session. Let's consider those shadows tomorrow when I've got a fresh head on. It can be surprisingly exhausting concentrating to this degree for so long. So put down the brushes, go and have a cuppa, either come back to it then or leave it 24 hours, 2 days, even a week. I wouldn't leave it much longer than a week because you'll forget what it was, what the issue was. And your confidence won't be there if you leave it too long. But don't think you've got to, well, this is it, this is the end. If I don't paint this now, it's going to be a disaster. That's not the case. I'm weighing it up myself as I'm saying this, and I'm able to make these decisions myself a little bit quicker these days because I've spoilt so many paintings in the past, and that's the truth. You only get to do this by painting lots of bad paintings, and although that, quite rightly so, people think, oh, you're joking, brings a laugh in the classroom. It's the absolute truth. You only get the good stuff from painting a lot of bad stuff in the first place, and welcome that bad stuff. Don't think, oh God, it's another bad painting, I'm so bad. You should be thinking quite the opposite. Oh, another bad painting, that means a good one's closer. I'm getting closer to the good one. The good one's going to be the next one or the one after that. The good ones are your friend. The bad ones are your friends because they're helping you get there. Right, little bit of white gouache, I think. I'm going back to my rigger, and this really is the finishing touches. I take my white gouache directly from the tube. Okay, I do two things with this now. I look for somewhere where I might expect to see some white lines. They could be anything from a so a bit of old cord or rope hanging off the trailer down here. Could just be a little bit of highlight in this, which is still damp. Now you can do this as I'm doing it wet in wet, or you could wait till this is all dry. I could speed dry it, but I quite like it wet in wet. If you wait till it's dry or speed dried, of course these lines will stand out a lot more than mine are. The other thing I do with this is sorry, I should be showing you this. I just dunk this brush in water, but I'm still taking the paint directly from the tube, and I'll just tap like this, some snowy type texture, mostly across in front of the trees in the background. You can, if you have fun doing this, and it is fun, it's great fun. You can almost, dare I say this, you be coming back to me and saying, you said you could do any amount of this. You can almost do any amount of this, because most of it will sink into the paper, and you might not even see it tomorrow. You could put more on tomorrow. But I always sort of see this as, you know, falling snow, whatever, and the occasional line in places. So there we are. Clean off the brushes. I mean, it's such fun. It is so much fun. And don't be disheartened, folks. If you're looking at your paint and thinking, God, you know, this is, I did everything I could. I've tried everything. I sort of followed Howard, I thought, religiously there. And if you're not 100% happy with what you've got, please, it's like I say, it's not always going to happen every time. I've got paintings as I stand here behind me. You know, I tear them up. I tear them up and make collages sometimes. Hang on, just show you that I'm not lying here. There's the remains of something some of you might recognize from a previous watercolor session. You know, don't get precious about things. If it's a good one, I'm not that crazy, I don't think. But if it's a good one, don't tear them up. If you paint a lot, it does a nice thing. It sort of takes the preciousness out of everything you do. As long as you don't overlook the good ones and think, oh, hang on a second, I better keep this one. But I get loads of paintings that I'm not happy with. We've all got our own personal best to achieve every time we paint. And that's the main thing is just to say, apart from the enjoyment factor, I wonder how long I would last if I didn't produce a good painting for, say, 6 months or something. Would I just sort of give up, throw the towel in? And I don't know. I don't think I would, because take everything else away, good painting, bad painting, I don't think I would miss the enjoyment, just the sheer enjoyment of painting. Let me put a mount around this and we'll see where we are with it. There, it's slightly bleached on my screen anyway, on my laptop screen. The camera, the light that's over here, over in that direction there, is slightly bleached out. So although it's not a bad rendition, and I'm quite happy with it, I think it's a keeper. I probably won't tear this one up. I think if I were to play around with my dimmable light, might just take some of that overexposure out. There we are, folks.